All right, so it's 8 o'clock in the morning. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us to the 11th webinar of PAASE. So, these webinars are sponsored by the Philippine American Academy of Science and Engineering, which is an organization consisting of scientists and engineers with Filipino descent, initially based in the US and in the Philippines, but now we have other members in other countries as well. So this morning, we will talk about lessons learned from COVID 19. Reengineering the food supply chain in the US, and vertical farming for urban resilience in the Philippines. So I think this is a very important topic, not just because of the COVID 19 pandemic, but primarily because of our issues on growing population, trying to be more sustainable with our food supply, as well as issues with climate change. So, our speaker for today, we have two speakers. Um, the first one is Professor Joel Cuello, who is a biosystems engineering professor and the director of the Global Initiative for Strategic Agriculture in Drylands at the University of Arizona, USA. And he is the vice chair of the International Association for Vertical Farming. He also serves as a scientific advisor around the world and is an active member and officer of a number of scientific and professional societies. Being a globally recognized and accomplished expert in the engineering of sustainable biological and agricultural systems, he has designed, constructed, and implemented several systems optimizing productivity while maintaining sustainability, such as the accordion bioreactors, the mobile and modular vertical farm, and the V-Hive vertical green box, to name a few. He currently teaches his developed courses Globalization, Sustainability, and Innovation, and Integrated Engineering Solutions in Food, Water, Energy Nexus at the University of Arizona. There's so much more to say about Professor Coelho. So, he will be joined by Ralph Becker, who is the owner and founder of Urban Greens, formerly inhabited the tech corporate business world before turning into a veritable hydroponic enthusiast. He is a German Filipino born and raised in Luxembourg and now based in the Philippines. He started Urban Greens in 2016 with a vision to bring hydroponic technology to urban centers, remote sites, and islands around the world. Eat your eaturbangreens.com. Okay, without further ado, take it away, Dr. Coelho.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. Can you hear me well?
Yes, we can.
All right, yeah. So good morning to everyone in the Philippines as well as in Southeast Asia. Uh, I would like to thank, of course, PAASE for this opportunity to give this webinar. And I'll be focusing on re-engineering the food supply chain in the US and in the Philippines. And I'm really glad that this morning I could be joined by Ralph Becker, who'll be speaking after me. I'd like to thank as well the Association for Vertical Farming because they did promote this webinar on their website as well as their social media platforms. And so I think that we have a global audience today. It's about 1 a.m. in Central Europe, 8 p.m. on the East Coast, and 5 p.m. here on the West Coast of the US. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us at the Philippine American Academy of Science and Engineering. So, we're not over yet with COVID-19, this pandemic that really caught everybody by surprise. And the rate by which it really conquered the world essentially is mind-boggling and unprecedented. And that has resulted in the massive disruption of not only the global economy, but basically all societies on Earth. And so it's true that we see a lot of really strange sceneries worldwide. So this is a scene in Metro Manila, which is notorious for its heavy traffic 24 hours a day. And as you can see, this picture is showing basically a deserted main artery in Metro Manila. This one is in Paris, France. And again, typically this one is filled with cars all around this arc, but it's deserted. And of course, this one is Times Square in New York City, which is always filled with crowds and vehicles, and now it's virtually deserted. So through the pandemic, we see a lot of these strange sceneries and things occurring. And what's one such strange thing is empty grocery shelves, particularly at the start of the pandemic as it hit North America, which is really strange because, you know, the United States is one of the most food secure nations in the world, and it's well known for its abundance of food, and that's why it's got a lot of exports going on all the time around the world. But then it's really surprising and quite unsettling to be able to see a lot of grocery stores across the nation with empty shelves like this. And not just that, but because a lot of businesses closed, and so naturally a lot of Americans got laid off, and so they didn't have income, and so that is why food banks all over the country got overwhelmed by demand from citizens. So these are lines of cars that are waiting to get their food from the food bank. I believe this one was in Ohio, and this one is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And to make the whole thing more surreal and more strange, we see headlines like this from the New York Times, where there are reports of fresh produce that are being dumped and vegetables that are being plowed back into the ground. This is in southern Florida. These are squash and zucchinis. And you've got these tons of onions in Idaho that are ready to be buried underground. So this is really strange. On the one hand, there's this huge demand in the retail outlets, in the food banks, and yet when you go to the production sites in the farms, you have a lot of produce that are not going anywhere and are being dumped and disposed by producers. So what's the story here? Well, the story has to do with the supply chain. So the case here is the United States, so we're focusing on the United States. So there is no food scarcity in the United States. There is an abundance of food. There's oversupply of food, but the problem is connecting that food supply to the people who need them, and that is a function of the supply chain. So here's an illustration, a simplified or simplistic illustration of the supply chain in the United States. So you have the farms here. This is where the fresh produce are produced. And then they go into the packaging, so where they are packed. And then of course they are transported into a regional hub, for instance. And then from the regional hub into a regional distribution center, a more local retailer distribution center, and then into the outlets, typically the retail outlets. But what has become clear and what's been made apparent by this COVID-19 disruption is that the fresh produce supply chain in the United States is really double-stranded. And that is defined by the final destination of the fresh produce. So one are the retail outlets, the other one are the food service outlets. So if we trace this back from the origin, so you've got the farm where the fresh produce are produced, they go into the packaging, and then from the packaging, that's where the divergence originates or starts. So for the food service outlets, they're packaged in a different way, usually in much larger volume. And they have a different labeling requirements in terms of nutrition and so on and so forth. And so that goes into its own regional hub, distribution center, and then the food service outlets. So these outlets are hotels and restaurants and bars and schools and offices and prisons and so on and so forth. On the other strand, from the packaging, and again, they're packed in a different way and they have a different requirement as well in terms of nutrition labeling or food labeling. They go into their own regional hubs, distribution centers, and then it goes to the different retail outlets. So you have supermarkets and grocery stores and bodegas. So what happens, and of course in the United States, because the United States is a humongous country, this is going on across basically the continental United States, from the West Coast to the East Coast. So what happened in terms of the disruption that was caused by the pandemic is that the food service outlets, the restaurants, the bars, the schools, the offices, the hotel restaurants, a lot of them got shuttered as a result. And so, in other words, those producers that typically have contracts with the food service companies or outlets, suddenly they find themselves not having any destination for their produce. They don't have anybody to sell them to. That is a big problem. Then on the other side, in the retail outlets, suddenly there's an uptick. There was a sudden increase in the demand because people were panic buying. And so that's why you see those empty grocery shelves. And the main problem here is that the food service supply chain and the retail supply chain, they do not communicate. They remain separate from one another. They don't converge. And now that this COVID-19 pandemic suddenly happened, the distributors in the food service outlets suddenly don't know what to do with their produce because we're talking tons and tons of produce here. And they found out that it's not that easy for them to repackage them. Number one, that's costly. Number two, they don't have the facilities. Also, they need to relabel them, and they're not ready for that. And these are perishable produce, and so they're very much under time pressure. And more important, they don't have contracts with retail outlets. You need to have those contracts with the retail outlets before you can actually sell your produce to them in bulk. And that is the reason as to why it turned out to be much more economical for these suppliers and producers that are catering to the food service supply chain to simply dump and dispose their fresh produce in the meantime. So sadly and tragically, that's the story here. And so again, that's why they decided to dump a lot of the fresh produce. And that's why you saw a lot of sceneries like this. So what this really brought to the fore is the need to redesign America's fresh produce supply chain after COVID-19 toward increased resilience, inclusiveness, and sustainability. So the current fresh produce supply chain in the United States has been in existence now for about half a century. And it exists that way because it's proven to be efficient. It's efficient economically and it's efficient logistically, even though a lot of them actually involves crossing the continental United States, say from California and Arizona all the way to the East Coast in New York City and other cities around New York. That's a distance of about 2,500 miles. In kilometers, that's about 400 kilometers. If you think about it, it's not that efficient, but still it's efficient when you just look into the logistics aspects of it and the costs aspect. And that is why it's lasted for about half a century. So this is now a great opportunity then to re-examine, to have a second look at the supply chain design in the United States and be able to redesign it, reconfigure it, and re-engineer it so that it becomes much more resilient, much more sustainable, and much more inclusive. And these are the 6 metrics that I am proffering here. One is that it has to be more regionally and locally based. That, of course, is quite logical. With the disruption that's been caused by this pandemic, it really makes sense for the production side to be much closer to the outlets, the retail outlets or the food service outlets, because the ability then of the producers to respond to the changes in the demand can be done much more nimbly and much more quickly, as opposed to when your production site is 400 kilometers away. Inclusion of small and medium scale producers. So in the United States, you've got super farms. These are large farms, particularly situated in the Midwest. But of course, there's lots of medium scale farmers as well as small producers. And it really would be more inclusive for the supply chain to be able to have a healthy mix of all of them, so that it's not only the super farms that benefit from this, but even the small and medium scale farms. Mixing of food service and retail clients in the chains. I think this is the biggest lesson learned from the disruption caused by COVID-19 in the supply chain in the United States. There needs to be better communication and convergence between these two distribution or the chain strands, so that when one is disrupted, then the suppliers in that disrupted chain could pivot and basically transfer as much as possible to the other strand of the chain. Linking producer farms with sources of renewable energy. Yes, of course, we would like for this chain to become much more environmentally sustainable, and the source of energy that they use is critically important in that regard. So in terms of the use of solar energy, in terms of wind energy, and even in terms of renewable natural gas that is derived from treated wastewater would be very beneficial. Inclusion of indoor and or vertical farm producers, and I'll talk about this momentarily in greater detail. And Ralph, of course, is going to focus on this with respect to the Philippines. And then certification of supply chain nexus. It would be good really so that resilience and inclusiveness and sustainability could really be instituted or promoted. It would be good to have this certification that is issued by an independent entity. That would certify that nexus in terms of its sustainability and resilience and inclusiveness, and that would be for the benefit of the customers as well as everyone in the supply chain. So let me talk a little bit more about the inclusion of indoor and or vertical farms. So there are two paradigms for vertical farms. One is warehouse type. This one is from the company Mirai in Japan. The warehouse type of vertical farm is, imagine a closed warehouse, a huge one. It could be as big as a football field. And then you've got these layers upon layers, one on top of another of hydroponically grown plants. So there is no soil involved in this plant production. Sunlight is not used. Instead, electric lighting as supplied by typically now by light emitting diodes are used. The temperature inside the warehouse is regulated, the relative humidity, other environmental factors, the nutrient composition, and so on and so forth. So you can really optimize the growth rate and the quality of whatever it is that you are growing. And essentially, you divorce the production process from climate and geography. Wherever you are on Earth and whatever the climate is in that location on the Earth, you can have your production system independent of that geography and of that climate. This is another company in Japan. It's called Spread. This is the company Spread. They have this production plant that produces 21,000 heads of lettuce per day. And they went bigger with this facility. They're now producing, this plant is able to produce 30,000 heads of lettuce per day since 2015. This was back in 2007. I was invited to visit a vertical farming company called Cosmo Plant. This was close to the Narita airport. This is Mr. Cosmo here who owns Cosmo Plant, and they just wanted me to see the vertical farming facility that they were building then at that time. And it was quite impressive. Cosmo Plant still exists, but I think the owner has switched now. This is in the United States. This is Plenty. This is really one of the pioneers in vertical farming companies in North America. And they've raised millions and millions of dollars in terms of investment. Aero Farms is another pioneering vertical farming company in the US, and this is based in New Jersey. But they're expanding in a lot of places in the United States, as well as in the Middle East now, particularly in Abu Dhabi, in the United Arab Emirates. This is also Aero Farms. This is iBiotherapeutic, which is a vertical farming company based in College Station, Texas, but they're not growing plants here for food, but they're growing plants for producing insulin, which is a medicinal compound. So they basically genetically engineer the crop, and then they're growing the crops, not for food, but for insulin production. Here's another one based in the East Coast, Bowery Farm, which also is a vertical farming company. A Essence Grows. This is based in Silicon Valley. but they also have a manufacturing plant in Shanghai, China. All right. Paradigm number 2 for vertical farm is a modular structure. Um, so basically, you have a module. It's like a Lego block. And so you then arrange the modules in different geometric configurations, such as a cylinder configuration like this. This is the top view. This is the isometric view. This one is linear. So this is the top view. This is the isometric view. And of course, one very practical example of a module is a standard shipping container. So there's a number of companies now that really are specializing in designing vertical farms inside shipping containers. And again, the shipping containers can be arranged in different geometric configurations to come up with a more efficient production system. This is an alternative to a shipping container. This is Digital Engineering and in Europe, and they came up with this really good-looking modular unit that they can use for modular types of vertical farming. And they can be interconnected in various ways. So here at the University of Arizona, we have a used shipping container that my students and I retrofitted to be a modular unit for vertical farming. And we're really using it for educational and training purposes, but also as a locus for our design of original vertical farming growing systems. One of which is the V-Hive green box. So it's basically composed of the lighting board, and you have the growing board, and they're arranged in such a way that you can adjust the spacing between the boards and between the lamps, and also between the vertical farming unit or the hydroponic units. And you can then fill the shipping container with these boards so that you can really maximize the amount of crops that you can produce per unit volume of the shipping container. Here is a prototype that we built. And this is patented by the University of Arizona. These are students. They are happy every time they're inside this V-Hive green box. The other one is the Go Vertical Farm that we are developing and that we're going to be building a prototype for. So this is completely automated, and this is meant for warehouse types of vertical farms. So the good thing about this is that you can really minimize your labor because everything is automated, and you can keep the cleanliness of the growing rooms because the workers don't have to go in there because you can just command these units to move on their own. All right, so in terms of the inclusion of indoor and vertical farms, again, in the re-engineered supply chain, a lot of companies now are really taking heed of that point. Wendy's, for instance, this is Liliana Esposito, who's the Chief Communications Officer for Wendy's. We met in New York City at a conference last year. So she basically reported that Wendy's now is sourcing all of its tomatoes in North America from indoor production systems, such as greenhouses, hydroponic greenhouses in certain states here in the US, which is great because that means that they're more reliable and the quality as well as the yield are much higher compared with open field cultivation. And here's the latest one, which really is groundbreaking. Walmart, I think, is not present in the Philippines. So you may not be familiar with Walmart, but Walmart is a giant of a company here in the United States. It's the biggest company in America. And even though it's not classified as a grocery store or supermarket, they dominate the grocery industry in the United States. In fact, their revenue last year is $288 billion from 4,253 stores across the country. Anyway, what's groundbreaking here is that now they're doing a pilot study with Bright Farms, which is a vertical farming / indoor farm company. They have a production plant. Bright Farms has a production plant in Ohio. And so Walmart is selling their produce from their hydroponically grown indoor farms in 3 states, in Ohio, in Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. And of course, depending on the results of that, then they could expand the sale to all of Walmart's over 4,000 stores across the country. And that is great. This is the first time that Walmart is doing this, that it's selling this indoor farm grown crops. Here's a picture of the produce by Bright Farms on the shelves at a Walmart store. So now we're going to switch to the Philippines. I don't know how much time I have. Ooh, okay. Let me go quickly. So here's the relative size of the Philippines compared to that of the continental United States. If you compress the islands of the Philippines, its total land area represents only less than 5% of the total land area in the United States. So you would think that it would be much easier to redesign a more efficient and more resilient supply chain in the Philippines, but that's not necessarily so because it's an archipelago with lots of islands. But unfortunately, the dumping of fresh produce happened not only here in the United States, but even in the Philippines, as shown here. These are tomatoes that are dumped on the roadside in Nueva Vizcaya in Ifugao, in the northern Philippines. So if you look at the supply chain for vegetables in the Philippines, you have the producers here, and then you've got the wholesalers here. These are the trading posts, and then wet market retailers, and then the consumers. For the modern supply chain, you've got the producers. They go into traders / consolidators. Some would go to the vegetable processors if they're canned. And then the fresh produce would go into supermarkets, fast food chains, hotels, and restaurants, as well as households. So this is the current design of the supply chain in the Philippines. So this is the wholesaler for urban wet markets. This is an example of that. These are for the upland vegetables in the mountain province. This is the La Trinidad Benguet vegetable trading post, which I had a chance of visiting. But it's basically rudimentary. There's no cooling. Actually, they have some cooling rooms that are available, but none of the producers are availing of those because of the cost. They're pretty expensive. So everything is in the open air. And so it's very important for them to be able to sell this produce as soon as possible so that they won't go bad. And then they're transported from that trading post to different destinations, including in Metro Manila. And then from Luzon, there are ways to ship or to transport the produce into the other islands, southern islands. And these are the nautical highways that have been proposed to be developed in the Philippines. I really don't know if this have already been implemented. But again, there are some shipping routes by which produce could be efficiently transported from the main island, the biggest island in Luzon, to all the other islands south of that main island. This is interesting. These are the trends in Philippine vegetable production and area. So this is the land area of the country that is devoted to vegetable production. From 1980 to about 2005, there's been a steady rise in the land area. And this is also in terms of production. I don't have the recent data, but this is now becoming problematic because of the land conversion that's taking place, converting agricultural land into non-agricultural land, which really is attractive to a lot of landowners because of the greater returns, financial returns with non-agricultural land as opposed to agricultural land. So that's a challenge that the country is facing. This is also some data on imports and export quantity. This one is the export, which is, there's a decline and then it went back up. So you might assume that the export is steady. But if you look at the import, there is a steady increase in the import of vegetables by the Philippines from other countries. So that's very indicative of the rising food insecurity in the Philippines. So what COVID-19 has done really is to bring this into focus, and therefore there's an opportunity to redesign the supply chain in the Philippines toward greater resilience, inclusiveness, and sustainability. And again, these are the metrics that I'm proposing, regionally and locally based, optimizing even the relative locations of the trading posts, the central distribution centers, and so on and so forth. I think a lot can be done with this for improvement. And mixing of small and medium scale producers. And I would add here direct orders. Now that there's internet and there's cell phones, I think that customers now, and even those that produce the relief goods for citizens, can directly order from producers, let's say in Benguet province, so that they don't have to go through the wholesale or trading posts, but they can just sell directly to the customers. I think that would be beneficial for the customer, for the farmers. And inclusion of indoor and/or vertical farm producers, and Ralph is going to be talking about this. I just want to thank the DOST for granting me that visiting scholarship, or what we call Balik Scientist, for Eastern Visayas State University. So this is President Dominador of EBSU. This is Vice President for Research, Kaintik. And this is PAASE colleague, Alvin Colaba, who will be helping me with this effort. So I look forward to it. I'm not able to travel yet internationally, but as soon as that is permitted again, then I hope to be able to come and start the project. And we'll be working on vertical farming as well that is appropriate for Eastern Visayas. And I just would like to thank my group here at the University of Arizona. Okay, so thank you. And Ralph, I turn over the presentation to you. Kathleen, thanks.
Wow, thank you. Thank you very much, Joel, for this very in-depth presentation. I think a lot of the slides that you've shown, it's good that I didn't put them in because I was going from the same angle. So Kathleen, if you're okay, I'll be now doing my presentation. And I saw two questions one from Alvin and one from Edwin. And those are things that I'll be addressing in my part of the talk now. So, and actually, Edwin, I've just done the calculation here. So after my presentation or during the presentation, I will address that as well as Alvin's question here. Yeah. So feel free to also throw in questions as we go along. I hope everyone can see the slides.
Yes, we can see the slides.
So my name is Ralph. I'm the CEO and founder of Urban Greens, and we've been around since 2016, 2017 really. And the mission is to bring sustainable farming and produce to urban city centers using innovative vertical farming systems. So it's a lot to take in, but it's basically what Joel mentioned at the beginning with how vertical farming can be set up. And it's correct that I'm actually half Filipino, but I was born and raised in Europe, and I've lived in places such as Japan, such as the Bay Area in the US. And I decided to come here after my 10 years in corporate and in tech. Basically, I have a tech background, and I decided to come here to the Philippines to come back to the roots. And on this note, also happy Independence Day to fellow Filipinos here. Today is actually Independence Day, so good on you for making it up at 8 a.m. this morning to attend our presentation here. So even before all of this, all of COVID here, you know, the Philippines was actually struggling. The food supply system here is really, really broken. And on a general level, food is actually going to be really expensive. Farming is constantly disrupted here in the Philippines. Particularly, we are now shifting from the very hot season summer, where temperatures reach 35 plus degrees and it's super hot, and it's really, really hard to maintain a farm outdoors with enough water to keep the plants alive. And now we're switching over slowly towards the rainy season and the typhoon season, and where we have too much water, and storms and typhoons constantly will now destroy the farm fields that are left over. On top of that, in January, some of you abroad have heard of the Taal volcano explosion here. So a lot of the farms were covered in ash as well. So we're really at the short end of the stick here when it comes to being really exposed to a lot of these climate and changes. And why is even more relevant now? Because as Joel mentioned, we have this discrepancy between food being dumped on one end and people wanting food on the other end, and we simply can't connect both because of the various different challenges that Joel mentioned, which are connecting the farmers to really to the consumers on our end through farmers market, because with so many different levels in between. Here in the Philippines, it is said that from between the farmer and the end consumer, there can be as much as 12 different intermediate levels, each one of them always taking a small fraction of the cost of the profit. The farmer on one end really doesn't get much out of all of this, and from the price that we end up paying in the supermarkets or in the restaurants and bars and hotels, etc. So farming as such as a career here in the Philippines, or as in many countries, is something that not many people pursue. The average age of the farmer here in the Philippines is 67, or at least 60 plus. So it means that with the amount of food that we want to consume, it seems like we need to produce more food in order to cater for the growing number of people, particularly of the growing number of people moving to the urban city centers. And yet we are, as Joel showed in one of his charts before, we're plowing down a lot of we're trying to make a lot of new farmland and we do this by deforestation, right? So we're chopping down perfectly fit forest, and we're trying to make a forest farmland out of it in order to cater for the growing demand of people, particularly in the urban centers, right? So, and again, I just want to reiterate some of the things that Joel already mentioned. So we have three main problems here in the Philippines when it comes to supply chain, and these are the ones that I wanted to address, and why at the end, one of the solutions was vertical farming. And I say one of them. We have very inconsistent supply here because, as I mentioned before, we don't have winters here like in other parts of the world, but we do flip-flop between being a very hot country and humid country and a very wet and humid country, right? So now typhoon season is coming up, and we have about, on the year basis, I think about 24 typhoons coming to the Philippines. And on a year-to-year basis, the bigger typhoons are getting even more devastating, as you know, and there's not much that we can do about it from an individual point of view and reacting right now that has an immediate effect on that. So inconsistent supply, meaning that sometimes we have good demand or good supply and less supply, just depending on the seasonality, and it can be wiped out in one go with the next typhoon coming in or with the next volcano erupting. And there's not much that we can do about it simply because of the geographical location and makeup where we are here in the Philippines. And then secondly, we have very inconsistent supply, inconsistent quality as such, because if you go out into the countryside here in the Philippines and if you visit the farms, they look very much different than other farms in let's say other parts of the world, in Europe or in the US, where you have a lot more machinery and a lot more automation and a lot more investment as such. And even if it comes down to greenhouses, the simplest thing, there are very, very little greenhouses here in the Philippines. And simply because I think people always see it as, okay, this is a cost and this costs me a lot of money, but how am I going to recoup it? But on the other hand, we have significant loss when a typhoon comes in, or when a storm or drought hits us, where we do not have controlled environments. So This picture here in the middle was actually taken very recently. I took that out in the countryside, but it's, you know, we're still tending our fields with water buffaloes here, and it's a very, very common sight. And we don't use a lot of technology. In a day and age where we're having Zoom conversation, where everyone has a computer in their pocket, and yet we have to resort to this. At the end of the day, that means that sadly, we're one of the biggest importer of food throughout the region and in the world. And actually last year, we got #1 in net importer of rice in the world. So we are importing more rice, even the Philippines being a lush and green country, we're importing more rice than we're actually exporting. So that's really crazy. And that was one of the things that really struck a note to me when I first came to the Philippines here. We're also importing a lot of high-end food from countries like Spain, Italy, Holland, Australia, New Zealand, but also throughout, you know, we're importing food, even fruit and vegetable comes from Thailand, from Indonesia, from Cambodia. A lot of it comes from China as well, right? So if you go to a market nowadays, not all of the produce, even our dear Philippine mangoes would come from Thailand, right? One tidbit, I don't know whether you know this, jasmine rice, which is known to coming from Thailand. If you say jasmine rice, is associated with Thailand, but it was actually developed here in the Philippines, and then we taught the Thais how to do it, and now they've taken the reins on it and they're exporting it, right? Which is crazy. So some of the solutions that we looked at was inconsistent supply. We can't change the number of storms and typhoons or volcanoes passing through, but what we can do is we can grow in more protected environments, right? We're all sitting in a protected environment right now. We're all in our homes, so which means that we're not affected by what's going on outside. It could be rainy, it could be stormy, it could be wet, it could be cold, it could be super hot, and yet we are indoors and we're having this conversation here. We can change the lights, we can change the air conditioning, we can change the fans, we can change even our humidity here. So we ourselves have shifted from being an outdoors people to an indoors people, and we've shifted even some of our poultry, our piggeries, and our other farm produces indoors, so that they wouldn't be exposed to outdoors calamities. But yet we sort of let our vegetables and greens still remain outside, because we have an association that nature is anything that is outside, right? And then secondly, we, you know, within vertical farming, and then what Joe already alluded to, everything can be controlled. In our home, we can control things, we can automate things, right? We live in 2020. We're in the future right now. Think about all of the different things that we can do. And yet in farming is one of the least progressive industries, particularly here in the Philippines. And this is something that I've seen, obviously living in Japan and in the US and coming from Europe, that it doesn't have to be this way, right? So I looked at it in a different way. Like, why are we still doing this in this way here in the Philippines? And you know, and there's not much that we can do against logistical costs, right? Like, logistics will always be a thing, even if we're importing from other parts of the world and from the farms, and we're living in the urban city centers, and all of the food has to come from our mountain regions or from our farm regions. But what if we converted spaces in the city into farms, which means we cut out logistics and warehousing altogether by growing closer to the place of consumption, by reducing the farm to table distance. This is, you've probably heard this, and by reducing food miles literally into food steps, right? And that's what we're trying to do. So we're not, in a way, people are asking us whether we're competing with local farmers and we're taking jobs away from local farmers. No, we're really trying to address a lot of the food that is imported from very far away. So what we do as Urban Greens, we turn empty warehouse space or empty spaces, be that basements, etc., and we turn them into urban vertical farms. This is a picture that I've borrowed from Joel from his farm from the farm in Texas, right? But it's basically the concept that we're pursuing. This is a system here that we have, and people ask us, where can we visit one of your systems? And we have systems all scattered throughout Manila and Makati and BGC, and we're setting up more systems. This one here can actually be visited and can be seen from outside. It's at the Mind Museum here in BGC. So for those of you who are in the Philippines, come by and come and visit us in BGC in Manila. We've worked together with them on some of these systems, and this is a 4-level system, so not like the 18-level systems that we've seen in previous setups, but on from a conceptual point of view, this is really modular and scalable. So we have 5-level systems. We're now developing a 6-level system. The reason why we went for 4-level system is that we don't need different cranes or around in order to manage to harvest the top level. Anyone can do it, even just with a simple chair. So obviously, the higher you go, the more efficient you are per square meter. But then obviously, you need different machineries and ladders in order to attend to the higher levels, right? So vertical farming has a lot of there's a lot of upsides on that. We actually use a lot less water, and this would be somewhat instinctively different because you think hydroponics uses a lot of water, but versus a normal farm where you basically scatter water all across the field for your plants. A lot of the water on a farm field evaporates. That's a big percentage of it, and a lot trickles into the groundwater, right? In hydroponics, we have closed loop systems, we have water tanks, and the water gets circulated around. So that means there's no evaporation. 100% of the water that we put in is actually used for the plant production. So there's no excess of water that is being used. Secondly, we can produce 3 to 10 times, even a greater X number of times than farmland, simply because we can go tighter together. It's one thing, but then also on multiple levels. So if we were to multiply this times 18, we could grow a lot more. Actually, Edwin, you had how much area is needed in a vertical farm to produce the same amount of crops in 1 hectare of land. So I calculated that, and with the system that you saw before, this one here, 1 hectare of land, just as a reminder, is 10,000 square meters. And with a system like this before, we would only use 500 square meters. So 1/20th of a fraction, so 5% of actual land space. But then we're talking about an indoor farm. So that's a warehouse of 500 square meters would yield the same amount of produce than 1 hectare of farmland outside in our system, right? Let's say if we go to the systems that we've shown before, the much higher ones, we can condense that to a much smaller footprint. Crops can go a lot faster. We're not affected by seasonality, etc., because we do not have seasons indoors, right? Or we can change, we can adapt the seasons. And foremost, the latter part is we do not need to use pesticides, right? Because we do not have pests as such. And that's why we're always trying to operate in a very clean environment. Some of the warehouses that you've seen in different pictures, they really look like labs and clean rooms. In fact, in Japan, what they've done is they've used old CD factories. Think about it. When was the last time that you actually bought a CD-ROM, right? So CD production has gone down, but yet a lot of the CD factories, or at least the shells, remained, and they needed to think about what they can do with CD factories. So they've turned them into urban farms, into clean room, and they were using those clean rooms in order to create produce. One of the things, for instance, our participant here from Cameroon, this is very important as well. We don't use pesticides. We don't have locusts as well. Like on the eastern shores of Africa, one of the main concerns are these locust swarms and swarms of locusts that just fall on and ravage the fields within minutes, right? The whole farm is just gone. It's just eradicated by these big swarms of locusts and grasshoppers and everything that fly from farm to farm. So in an indoor scenario, we simply don't have that, right? What we do in our farms, and we're using technologies such as our IoT sensors, Internet of Things, right? So then we can control the environment, we can monitor, we can see how things grow, how plants grow, and we use data, right? We use data analytics to basically determine what grows best under which environment, right? And future plans from our systems include blockchain, so we can have an infallible ledger that cannot be tampered with in order to show you how our plants were grown and how they are produced and when they were harvested. How refreshing would it be, or how much would it help you to know where your food actually comes from? When was it harvested? Was there pesticides used? And you simply don't do this nowadays with farm food that even when from our farmers, right? One of the most scariest stories that I've heard is that before they ship their produce out, in order to make it look nice and fresh, they dip it in formaldehyde. Something where they do balming in dead people, right? So just to maintain, and it's coated in this layer of wax, and we eat this, right? And we don't even know, just because it looks nice. But with urban farming, we don't use pesticides. We don't need any of this. So how refreshing would it be? How great would it be if you knew exactly where your food would come from? We do everything in house. We don't buy technology from China, from Israel, from the US, and we basically do everything in house here in the Philippines. Happy Independence Day again. So in our team, it's, as I said before, the average age of the farmers here in the Philippines and probably throughout the world is 60 plus years old. And I pride myself that our team is constructed of a lot of young people, Gen Zs, millennials, etc. And we constantly get applicants and who wanting to intern with us and who are really young because they see that farming is something that needs to be addressed differently. They've seen urban farming and vertical farming on YouTube, and they just want to be part of it. It inspires them again, right? How amazing is it that we can inspire the next generation of farmers, and they are all biologists and they're scientists, right? This is a scientific approach how we do things. I've been also quite busy here during COVID times, I have to say. So we shifted a lot of the stuff. Maybe later, or just for yourself, we can do a show of hands how many people have started planting during COVID times just because they were at home and just thinking like, wow, our food supply chain is really very vulnerable. I need to grow my own food. So we're now promoting like indoor hydroponic kit to people. I've shown people how to grow produce. This is actually the tomato plant that I showed on CNN, so it actually did work. We're part of the Association of Vertical Farming, of course, and I want to give a big thanks to them, and we're one of the regional representatives. And I'm not sure whether anyone up here in the Philippines is part of it. And as Joel said, it is actually a really big industry, and we're basically in our we're still very small, but we have big ambitions for this country and throughout the region. That's it from me. My name is Ralph, and if you have any questions, let me know, and please connect with me on Facebook and on Instagram. And if you have any questions, please send me an email on this email address below, which is ralph@eaturbangreens.com. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Ralph. All right, so we have a few questions from our audience. I think you answered the one from Edwin. There was another question from Alvin.
Yeah.
Maybe you'd like to emphasize more on that, about what are the major challenges in building and sustaining an urban vertical farm.
Yes, and I wrote that down as well, Alvin. So And it's a very good question, right? Like, why don't we have more of this? And simply put, it is something that is very new here to the Philippines, right? And as such, it's we have to do a little bit of like upselling and education. We have to convince people how this can really be something that is meaningful and that can support the Philippine agricultural scene. And as I said before to Edwin, what would it take to turn 1 hectare worth of produce into an urban farm, into a vertical farm, and we would need about 500 square meters. But those 500 square meters, you would need the capital investment for that is actually quite, I don't want to say high, but think about 500 square meters worth of warehouse. But on top of that, each single system is also has carries a capital investment cost, right? So you quickly end up with a capital investment cost that is quite high, but the return of investment is definitely there. So people always get pushed away by the investment cost because, simply put, land is in the mindset of a lot of Filipinos, we have an abundance of land. A hectare of land is nothing here in this Philippines because we have a lot of land. Land is free, land is cheap, right? And so we always think like, why would I need to pay that much money? I'd rather like it's free and it doesn't cost me much labor. But then on the other hand, we don't consider all of the loss that we make, that we lose in when a typhoon hits. So Typhoon Ursula last year, for instance, caused about 750 million peso loss. Boom. That's one. That's one warehouse, right? Like, or less. A warehouse costs you less than that. And that's only one storm, one typhoon. Imagine the compounded amount of typhoons coming in. You know, in we tend to think very short term in terms of where is my return on investment? This is how much it costs, and oh my God, this is going to cost me so much money in order to put it. Whereas it's called investment for a reason. You have to put this
Mhm.
up as an capital investment cost, and you will have stable production for many years to come, right?
Right.
And but that's what it takes. It's capital investment is one thing, convincing people how this might be a solution for the future. Electricity is one thing because electricity cost in this country is actually quite high. So then we're trying to turn a lot of the farms that we have into sustainable farms using solar panels, etc. But then also that has a capital
Investment as
investment
well.
cost with an ROI as well. And then labor, right? Like in good or evil, we don't have that not a lot of people with hydroponic knowledge here in this country yet, but it takes a while for us. We're doing a lot on our fund to try and systematize more education towards that, and how we can turn conventional farmers or millennials or anyone who wants to be a farmer into an urban agricultural vertical farmer.
Okay,
Right.
thank you. I think we have, yeah, Joel, would you like to add into that?
Yes, if I could, please.
Yes, yes.
As Ralph mentioned, one potential disadvantage of vertical farming is the high amount of initial investment.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be quite intimidating to a lot of farmers, particularly the small ones.
Yeah.
But this is where really there is a need for farmers to organize themselves into farmers associations or cooperatives. Because really, if there's a farmer that's only family scale, even without vertical farming, it's going to be really tough for that family scale farmer to compete in the market today. And so there really is a need for farmers to be helped to organize themselves into farmers associations so that they can afford the initial investment. And really in business, the high cost of initial investment really is not that of a problem because it can be structured. The payment of that can be structured so that ultimately you're going to have your return on investment. And the great thing about vertical farming, as Ralph mentioned, is its reliability and dependability in terms of yield. Because again, it's no longer dependent on the weather, on the climate, on the geography. You're guaranteed that you're going to have this yield, which is a higher yield and higher quality as well. So the return on investment is going to happen.
Okay, so let me just step back a bit and start with questions from the initial presentation of Joel, and then maybe we'll go back again about adopting this vertical farms. So the first question is from Angeline Lau. With regards to the 6 metrics that you mentioned earlier, Joel, do you think that the Philippines is ready to actually implement these metrics?
Right. So if Evangeline, thanks for the question. If you notice, when I went to the Philippine part of my presentation, I reduced the 6 metrics into 3 metrics. And that's precisely the reason in that the readiness level in the Philippines probably is not up there yet as compared here in the US. And that's understandable. And so, and the fact that vertical farming really is just in the very infancy stage in the Philippines, and thanks to Ralph for initiating that, there needs to be some period of acclimatization as well as adjustment. So I'm not going to recommend outright those 6 metrics for the Philippines, but reduce them to the 3 ones that I presented.
Okay. And then the next question comes from Raymond Tan, since you talked about supply chains. So, if market conditions have led to supply chain configurations that put a premium on economies of scale, what financing mechanisms might be needed to allow for resilience to become a bigger factor?
Right. So that's a very good question, Raymond, and thanks for asking that question. So if in my view, when I look at the current supply chain for fresh produce in the Philippines, particularly the one involving Benguet province and the produce being transported mainly to Metro Manila, to me, that is not an optimized system yet. There needs to be some financing there to be able to improve, for instance, the Benguet trading post, as well as optimize really the logistical routes from that location to the various points in Metro Manila. Because I understand that, let's say from the Benguet trading post, they deliver that to the Visoria, which is another central distribution center. And then from there, they go to all the different outlets. I really think that there's a way to optimize that further and to do it in such a way that the return for the producers, the farmers, would be greater than what they're getting now by optimizing that entire system. So, and again, by the farmers organizing themselves into associations or cooperatives, they will have a greater bargaining power in that way.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Al Serafika. Can we formulate our SNAP solutions to lower the cost for vertical hydroponic farms in Tondo, which is being supported by Caritas Manila?
Okay, thanks Al for the question. I'm really not that familiar about the SNAP program. I need to be refreshed in terms of that.
Okay.
So I'll pass and I'll talk to Al later.
Okay, maybe Ralph, would you be familiar with SNAP
Uh,
solutions?
I'm familiar with the Snap solution. We started using that as well. What is the question that it's too expensive, maybe, or?
Yeah, how can we actually lower the cost so that for farms that are being supported by Caritas Manila, for example?
Um, there are different ways. So just use different suppliers out there. Maybe they can connect with us. We can maybe do something. We actually did a project in Tondo. Tondo, for all of you out there, is actually one of the slum areas here in the Philippines. We did have a project in Tondo. There were a lot of things that we needed to take care of, but maybe let's connect and then we can restart that conversation as well. I can certainly help you out there.
Okay. So cost is really a concern. So we have another question from Angeline Lau. So what about small scale farmers who might not have the resources and capability to create virtual platforms so that they can promote and sell their products?
Right.
Yeah. How do you think they can get into this?
There are several platforms out there now. I think Agrabah. There's like three, four platforms out there, and what they do is they have those platforms and they connect small farmers and give them a platform to spread out and connect with individual with individual people. So there are definitely platforms out there already.
Okay, we have a question again from Edwin, asking if it's possible to grow broccoli in a vertical farm. What is the most produced crop in a vertical farm?
Okay. So technically, it's possible now to grow any types of crops hydroponically.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Uh, I learned this when I was at NASA Kennedy Space Center, where we were doing space farming, and that's when the first time, it was probably arguably the first time that all different types of vegetables were grown hydroponically for the purpose of sustaining humans. And yeah, pretty much everything can be grown now hydroponically, so
Okay.
that's not a question. The question, though, is economic as to whether
Mm-hmm.
it would be economical, particularly in the Philippines, to grow broccoli hydroponically in a vertical farming setting. The most common types of crops that are grown in a vertical farm, hydroponically or aeroponically, are salad type crops, herbs, microgreens, tomatoes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. We have a question from Vince Daria. So, natural farming is an important component that maintains the balance of the ecosystem, and there are many players ranging from worms, insects, to birds. In vertical farming, play all all those components we think play a negative role is suppressed, but indirectly could have a positive effect on the products. Have you observed some indirect side effects? And how does artificial farming affect the entire ecosystem?
All right. So, Vince, the way I would answer that question is that vertical farming or indoor farming is not aiming to replace completely outdoor farming. Because we need all types of farming to be able to meet the food demand of the planet. And right now, really, vertical farming is such a small, infinitesimal portion of the food production in the planet that really you cannot make some really sound observations in terms of the question that you asked. But certainly, as vertical farming gains a share in the industry, that it becomes really extensive, then yeah, it would be important to look into some of those questions. But again, the message here is that vertical farming is not going to replace completely outdoors farming.
Yeah.
One thing that I want to mention as well is it's very instinctive to associate anything that is outdoors with nature, but you know the process of farming actually, if you think about it, is basically we're clearing out
Mhm.
let's say whatever there was before, but there was definitely not a farm there before that. Either it was a swamp or forest or something. Think about Brazil, think about like Australia, what they're doing now with burning down the rainforest just to make space for
Wait.
farmland was not there before. There was
Yes.
as well here in the Philippines. So once you've
Right.
cleared out that space, you actually then go on and turn out the soil, you add fertilizer, be
Right.
that however way you do it with worms and all of that, but you're manipulating it in a way to make it fit for farming. None of that is actually a natural process. You know,
Right.
there's physics and there's chemistry behind all of that that happens in the background, but as such, it's not what how nature grows food, right? So what we do in vertical farming is we basically take it one step further and we look at, okay, what it is that plants really need. And I understand where you're coming from, but think about the amount of people moving into the urban spaces, right? Like we have a growing population in the world. Like we're going to hit 9 billion people by 2050, 70% of which will be living in the urban spaces. All of those people will have to be fed somehow. So we either can go and try and turn more forest spaces, perfectly working forests or other lands, into farmlands, and then go through all of the logistics and shipping all of those things uh, from the farms into the city centers. Or we can start thinking about how we integrate farming into the local urban fabric of the city spaces right from the start. We don't turn new spaces into
Mm-hmm.
farms. What we do is we turn unused spaces in the city center into farms. And you would be surprised how many unused spaces there are in the city centers, in the city areas that cannot be used for offices, that cannot be used for housing. And we simply turn those already existing concrete spaces into farms.
I see. Okay, a question from Muhammad, very much related to the question on the broccoli. What is the limitation of plant types growing in-house in vertical farms?
Yeah, Mohammed, thanks for the question. So again, basically there's no limitation. Although right now, with the kind of technology that we have right now, we prefer to grow in vertical farms crops that are relatively short, so that you can produce more and so that your shelves can be more compact for that particular volume. And you want crops that grow much faster.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Now we can talk about grains like rice and wheat and barley. They can be grown in vertical farms. However, these are commodity crops, and commodity crops are abundant and they are cheap in the global market.
Okay.
And so it's not advisable to grow them at this point in time in vertical farms.
Okay, then we have a question from Francis. Do you know of any opportunities for funding vertical farming?
I'll leave that to Ralph.
Ralph, any insights on that?
Oh, for you to get funding or for, well, there are different institutions out there, and you know, we've been trying to get to also talk to the DA about this, because the DA is pushing for vertical or urban farming as well here. For some reason, Urban Greens, we haven't been able to get in touch with anyone with the DA. So if anyone can help us, but there's certainly, I think the motivation is there, like the mindset is there. What we found is that you know, we've been approached by quite a lot of people from abroad, outside of the Philippines, to help us fund, because it is something, vertical farming and urban farming is something that in different parts of the world is more common and more, you know, people know about it more. So they see that what it is that we do has quite a potential and impact. So
Mm-hmm.
it's sad to say that we get more interest from people from abroad about what it is that we do here in the Philippines than from local Filipino investors as well. So maybe that might be the same for Francis in Cameroon. You know, if you if you is that Francis in
Yeah,
Cameroon?
yes, that's correct.
Right.
Okay, on a related
Can I
note.
add something
Yeah.
quick to that, please? So there are two countries that are very food insecure, whose government really is providing a lot of funding locally for vertical farming to be developed in their respective countries. One is Singapore, the other one is United Arab Emirates, particularly Abu Dhabi. So Abu Dhabi just recently in the last few months spent $100 million to fund startup companies, as well as AeroFarm, which is an American vertical farming company, to establish in Abu Dhabi the largest R&D facility for vertical farming. In Singapore, they really would like to, because they don't want to do traditional farming anymore, because their land really is very limited for agricultural application. So they want to go higher or upwards vertically. And so vertical farming is a good fit for them. And Rob mentioned rooftop farming as well with vertical farming. Singapore is very much into that. It's very much incentivizing.
Okay, on a related note, so Al is also asking, do we have profitable models in the Philippines, and what is the current scale in terms of volume and revenue?
Ralph, please.
Um, sure. We profitable models. I mean, we are. I can only talk about the us here. It would
Mm-hmm.
be. I probably shouldn't talk about any other companies out there because I'm not familiar with their profit model. Of course, from our side, profitable. If profitable means that on a monthly basis, we can produce enough produce in order to cover our operational costs,
Mm-hmm.
then yes, that is the case. However, we are still since we are a new company, we have a lot of capital investment costs that we're
Mm-hmm.
still recouping, but it's just a matter of time. So we're looking to scale the technology that we have, and that's why we're looking for more spaces in the city and for more partners that we can work with, where we can set up our indoor vertical farms. It works, and I'm happy to have that conversation with whoever was it who sent it.
Al Serafika. Yeah, he said, yeah, you should talk. I'm sure Joel can get you in touch with him also.
Sure, sure.
I will.
Please drop me an email.
Okay, yeah, I have a question about that. With regards, maybe in terms of your experience, Ralph, and in terms of the most optimized system that you've worked with, in terms of cost, which particular component contributes most to the cost?
LED lights,
Oh,
hands
okay.
down. It's unfortunately one of the things that is not, it's the only thing that is not available here in the Philippines. Even our IoT units, we develop them in-house or in the Philippines here. We have a lot of smart people, but LED lights come from China. And as such, they need to be imported. They need to be bought and shipped in China. And then we need to deal with the port authorities here, etc. So it's quite cumbersome. In good or evil, we don't have this technology here, but I would say that a tremendous factor in order for us to scale indoor vertical farming is the cost of LED lights. Now the cost as such goes down on a yearly basis. The efficiency of the lights goes down as well, but as a single highest cost, it would be the LED lights.
Okay. I have one more question. You mentioned a while ago about Internet of Things. So are these technologies being implemented already at Urban Greens?
Yes, yes, we've built our own systems here. We could have chosen to use technology from the US, from Japan, from you name it, from Israel or so forth. But then we would have to, it wouldn't be our technology. We would have to pay a license fee. So we decided to use local engineering and science skills
Mhm.
and develop our own system. So we can tinker with it, we can improve it. It obviously has a higher investment from the start, but you are 100% the owner of that technology, and you can tailor it towards your need without having to ask some other company to give you access or authority over their technology.
Okay, we have a follow-up question from Vince since you mentioned about LED lights. So, is there a way to route sunlight in addition to artificial light? Is the spectrum of artificial light enough for photosynthesis?
Maybe Joel can say that.
I can answer that. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So with photosynthesis, really, technically, you need only the red wavelength as well as a little bit of the blue. In practical terms, the rule of thumb is 90% red and about 10% of the blue. With that, you can have a plant that is growing with high growth rate as well as the proper form or morphology. But now vertical farmers are really optimizing the combination of the different wavelengths so that they can come up with greater yield as well as greater quality. Uh, Sunlight is basically white light, so it includes all of the wavelengths. The photosynthetically active radiation is about 400 nanometers, which is on the blue side, up to about 700 nanometers, which is on the red side.
Okay, thank you. I think we've exhausted all of the questions. Do you have any final words for our audience, Joel and Ralph?
Oh, just to follow up to route sunlight in addition to artificial light. You can, or you simply create a greenhouse. Then you don't have to reroute it, but you would still have days where it's dark. Like where you have. The Philippines has a lot of sunny days. I think the Philippines has on average 320 sunny days, but it gets dark quite early here, like around 5 p.m., 6 p.m. It's already pretty dark, so the plants can't grow. So in order for you to maximize or to increase growth, you can actually stretch that by having lights on until 8 p.m., let's say, or 10 p.m., right? Plants still have to sleep. But you can, you have more consistency in your lighting. Now with the rainy season coming up,
Yeah.
it will actually be quite dark for a lot of the days, and photosynthesis is reliant on a good amount of sunlight. So the plants grown outdoors during this time of the year are are not as big and perky and healthy as plants growing in more sunny days.
Okay.
Right.
We have additional questions from Giselle. These are very much related to some of the questions which were already raised originally, like what veggies are most optimally grown in vertical farms, and what would be the cost of a kilo of romaine lettuce, which is grown in greenhouses versus vertical farms. Maybe Ralph, you can give us some information on what types of crops do you grow in your systems.
Okay, so that's a good question about cost, because if at the end of the day, if it's a business that that is not cost efficient, then it doesn't work. So uh, us at Urban Greens right now, we produce high value crops, and we don't produce romaine lettuce at the moment because romaine lettuce is one of the things that is quite abundant in
Mm,
outdoor farms at the moment, and the price per kilo is very low. What we do is we grow high value crops such as, let's call it arugula,
okay.
basil, mint, and those type of crops, dill, herbs and leafy greens. And the reason is that the market that we address right now is looking for quality rather than price. Right at the moment, we haven't reached the critical mass yet um, that we can produce large scale lettuces like other farms that you've probably seen like in the slides before.
Mm,
That's why we concentrate our efforts on very high value crops, and our target market at the moment is are people and industries that are looking for high quality that they've up until now actually imported from
yeah,
Europe, from the
yeah.
US, from Australia, New Zealand, which they were simply
Mm,
not able to get here.
yeah.
So the price that they were paying for this kind of produce was much higher than right now that they would be paying from us that is grown locally.
Okay.
Yeah.
So thank you. Joel, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, some parting words. So again, thank
Mhm.
you to PAASE for this opportunity. But I just would like to remark that the agriculture in the Philippines really needs some timely overhauling.
Yeah.
Because number one is the Philippines needs to become more food secure. And the farmers need to be taken care of in the sense that their business enterprise needs to be profitable for them to stay as farmers, and also for young people to go into growth production as well. And so I really earnestly propose that the Philippine government needs to look seriously into this emerging sector of vertical farming / indoor farming in the country. In conversation with startup companies like Urban Greens with Rolf and others, because it's really important for the country to be able to have this alternative type of agriculture so that the country can meet its food demand, and also that it can grow its export as well, because the quality of the products that are produced in vertical farming is really top notch. And that is one way by which the country can develop its food export avenue. And again, this requires a government, industry, and
Mm,
academic partnership. Ralph mentioned the astronomical cost of LEDs in the Philippines. So with the cooperation with the government, perhaps LEDs can be reclassified
mm,
as something of importance to the country, and therefore some tariffs could be reduced as the country imports it from China and other countries as well. So I really think that it's high time for the Philippines to look closely into this new vertical farming industry. It really is a great example as well of the fourth industrial revolution applied to industry, because you have the convergence of the physical, the digital, and the biological in this particular sector. So thank you.
okay, thank you. But before we close, I'd like to just inform everyone of our talk for next week. Okay, so let me just share my screen. So next week, we're having Professor Raymond Tan from De La Salle University to discuss about the current trends in carbon emissions pinch analysis. So this will be on June 19, Friday, 8 to 9 a.m. Philippine Standard Time. So Professor Tan is a university fellow from De La Salle University and also an academician of the Philippine National Academy of Science and Technology, with more than 300 publications and an H-index of 43 in the Scopus database. He is among the top researchers in the world in the areas of process integration and process engineering. So if you're interested to join us next week, please don't forget to register at tinyurl.com/Raymond R. Tan. And again, I'd just like to tell everyone that the Philippine American Academy of Science and Engineering has their own Facebook page. We also have our own website, which is at paase.org. And all the webinars that we've been hosting will be posted on Paase Webinars, bit.ly/Paase Webinars. In addition to that, I also want to shout out to our Paase members. Just as a reminder that the nominations for the Severino Pasco Lectureship Awards, the deadline will be on June 16. So please don't forget to send in any nominations and please forward it to Dr. Alvin Colaba, who is the chair of the Co-Lectureship Awards Committee, together with Diana Aga and Civil de Terra Wadley. Okay, so thank you very much for that.
Yeah.
All right, so
All
that
right.
ends our webinar for this morning. Thank you everyone for joining, and I hope you can join us again next week. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Kathleen.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Ralph.
Thanks,
Ralph,
everyone.
I'll be linking you. I'll be linking you with the folks who ask you questions.
All right, fantastic.
All right.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
bye.
All right. Bye.